Hey fellow tennis nerds, the video about choosing a racket was very long. I'm going to try to save a bit more of your time and be more to the point. Strings are very important. As you know, I would say it's half of the racket at least. It's what makes contact with the ball when you hit. So if you're using old strings, you're going to ruin the whole experience of the racket and playing tennis. So definitely make sure you keep up with your restringing, whether it's 15 hours per string. It all depends on how hard you hit. If you're a beginner, you can use the same string until it breaks. I would definitely recommend using a multifilament or synthetic gut or gut string for beginners. They are softer strings that give you more power and are also softer on the arm, so much better in general for beginning players. For pros, they rarely can use like gut strings unless it is in a hybrid, and a hybrid setup is when one string, whether it's the mains or the crosses, is different from the other strings. So you have two strings paired together to create kind of a dish of its own. So you have the main flavor in the mains of the racket and the side flavor in the crosses to create kind of a combination, and some strings pair really well together. There are many pros that use hybrid setups like Roger Federer. He's now retired, but even Novak Djokovic, Andy Murray, and the list goes on. So that's a popular way of getting a little bit of power, but also a bit of control from the polyester string. Quick word now from our sponsor. Quick sponsor break. Check out the singles playbook from Fuzzy Yellow Balls. They will teach you patterns, how to beat certain types of players with different strategies and patterns of play. Full with videos, lots of different chapters on beating pushers, counter punchers, serve and volleyers, and so on. I found this product great. I bought it over a year before they asked to sponsor some YouTube videos for me. So check it out. The link is in the description. But there are different types of polyester strings. I'm not going to talk about Kevlar, which is the stiffest string that's kind of not so popular anymore. Some swear by it because they like a very firm setup, and that can also work in a hybrid setup. But generally, there are mainly polyester strings and multifilament string. There's also synthetic gut strings, which are kind of lower cost strings, usually what you have in a racket if you buy it. If it's not like a more advanced model that comes usually unstrung, you get these synthetic gut strings. But I would say multifilament are more like high quality, softer strings. That is fine to use up to a pretty high level, so you don't need to be an advanced player and playing only with polyester strings, because polyester strings tend to be stiffer and can be a bit problematic to your elbow depending on the tension and the racket you use it in. So I would take a little bit of caution. Nowadays there are endless types of strings, polyester strings mainly. There's so much variation. Shaped strings, triangular strings, 4-sided, 6-sided, 8-sided, round strings, all colorways. And with color, what the pros in the industry usually say, and I agree with, is that the brighter the string, the livelier the response, even from the same type of string. So if you have a black string, it's going to play a bit more dead. And if you have a brightly yellow string, it's going to play a bit more lively. It sounds like hocus pocus, but there's something about the things you add into the color of the string that actually makes it play differently. And there's so many different strings to choose from, so I know that's very difficult to find the right string. And it's sometimes the biggest struggle. You can find your racket, it's perfect, your setup, you have it customized, but then you get to the strings and it's like a even worse jungle in the rackets. But if we get to the different types of strings, there are mainly three different things you should think about when it comes to string. It's the type of string you use, whether it's multifilament for power or polyester for a bit more control and spin, and the tension you use, which is the key element, I would say. If you use very high tension up in the 55 pounds and above, for example, if you hit very hard, you might need that for control. Or if you like these lower tensions, some pros even use as low as 25 pounds. I have made a video about Adrian Manarino using 25 pounds. So you can go down a lot in tension and still be able to control the ball, depending a little bit on how your swing style is. So you need to kind of dial that in. Back in the day, if you just go back 15, 20 years, tensions used to be higher. Now with the polyester strings being more and more controlled, they've gone down a bit. So now you can find pros that use 44 pounds, which is around 20 kilos, but all the way up to 62 pounds. Like Yannick Sinner, for example, uses very high tension on his Headhawk touch string setup. And if you use a multifilament or gut, the tensions tend to be higher because the string is softer, so you need that for more control. That's about tension, and there's also the gauge, meaning the thickness of the string. Generally, the thinner the string, the softer the feel, the more power you get, the better comfort. But the thicker the string, the more control, the more durability you get. If you're a string breaker, a guy or girl who hits with a lot of spin, you break strings frequently. I know guys that break strings every hour, even polyester strings, then you might need to go for the maximum durability, but at the cost of comfort, obviously, because the more durable strings are not usually so comfortable. Another very important part of strings is tension maintenance. So it needs to actually hold tension. So some strings drop in tension very rapidly. Tends to be the case with polyester strings, especially softer polyester strings. They really have a quick tension drop. Start pretty well and then go down really fast. As stiffer polyester strings, they are a little bit better at usually holding tension, and natural gut, the old string made from cow intestines, is the best string at holding tension. But on the other hand, that's more not a spin string. The string doesn't snap back into place. And that's what you find with polyester strings. You get that string to move and then snap back into place. I just took a bunch of strings here, and there's so many brands, and the brands all have different options to choose from. I just took 2 Prince strings. It's not really a known brand for strings. But for example, if you go for a multi-filament string, you see that the core on the packaging here is it's multi. There's several cores. And a multi-filament string, it's a bit more of a complex string, and it's softer. So it's generally better for your arm, but it's not gonna be so spin friendly. So that's very good to keep in mind. Every string brand in marketing usually puts control and power. These are 2 opposites, I would say. So generally don't agree with this marketing stuff, but you know, that's what it is. And then you have a polyester string, which has kind of a 1 core situation here. So you can see the difference on the packaging here. Of the string, and I think that makes sense to actually show that. So polyester strings, spin and control, multi-filament strings, more about power and comfort. And there's nothing wrong with being an advanced player playing with a multi-filament string to get more power or protect your arm, especially if you have flatter strokes. Colorways are all over the place, even for multi-filaments. You can find pink strings like the Head Velocity MLT, but a lot of polyester strings are generally gray, darker, and that's generally the thing you see. But then there's strings, polyester strings, that have really gained traction, partly thanks to their colorway. I mean, it's also playability, but that's Solinco Hyper G, for example. I don't have it here, but I have another brand that has made like a Solinco Hyper G style string called Signum Pro Experience, and that's the colorway you might recognize. Solinco became quite famous with that, with their Hyper G, which is a very spin-oriented 6-sided string that gives you a lot of like bite on the ball, and it's been used quite frequently among advanced players, but also rec players and pro players. When you buy strings, they often come in sets like this. Now they're trying with more environmentally friendly packaging. Strings like the new Laxon Eco Power, for example, that I reviewed, is made from 90% PET bottles and to 10% some other recyclable plastics. So they're trying to be a bit more environmental friendly, because strings are not generally very environmentally friendly. They're not as bad as balls, but pretty bad. So they're trying a bit more with the packaging. But you can buy it in a set like these, which is usually from €8 to €20. Laxon strings are the most famous one, and they just tend to cost a bit more. I think I have a set here. Laxon All Power, for example, is the flagship string. I'm not saying it's better than any other string, but this is what you see a lot on the tour. And they were also the first with their big banger, the kind of string that changed the game a little bit when they released that. Guga Kuerten used that at the 97 Roland Garros, which he won. And I think the game changed a bit. I would say that the polyester string is the biggest factor in the change of tennis, because before, when you play with a multi-filament string or a gut string, the strings don't snap back, so you can't add that much spin on the ball. You can't hit it as hard because partly you're gonna have to moving the strings all the time because they don't snap back, but you don't get that same bite on the ball, the same spin where the ball just dips in. There are players that used to play with huge amounts of spin. Sergi Bruguera was one of those guys that played with huge spin despite using a multi-filament string or a gut string, I'm not exactly sure, but that was a rarity. So I think definitely the polyester changed the game and made it so that players could now hit, you know, the racket like this instead of more like that. So you would definitely get massive rotations on the ball. You kind of hit like style of a table tennis stroke. getting that ball to really dip in over and over again. You have guys like Rafa, for example, is the biggest prominent guy of Spain, but now Alcaraz. They wouldn't be able to play the same way with multi-filament strings. And I have some examples. This beautiful Lacoste racket, for example, it's Lacoste owns Technifiber. Technifiber makes these rackets for Lacoste. It's a little bit more of a showpiece, I would say. I mean, it plays okay, but it's not something maybe for, unless you really want to show off with the nice Lacoste brand. But here you have a nice multi-filament Technifiber string. It's a TGV, and you can hear the sound, how it, you know, when you try to move the string, how I have this crickle. It doesn't really snap back, and you have that sound. And you used to have players, you know, after points, move the strings back into place. Maybe you're an older player like me, who used to do that when we first started playing. You used to have to move back the string. And nowadays with polyester strings, you don't really have to do that. So these types of strings, multi-filament strings, for rec players are a little bit easier to identify when they're gonna be replaced, because partly when they really lose tension, you can't control the ball, and also they usually snap before they lose too much tension. Sometimes you see on the club level that players use a polyester string for too long, and the polyester loses its elasticity, doesn't have the same snapback, and it's kind of a dead string, and that can be pretty harmful to the arm, and you won't get the same nice properties of that spin generation with a polyester when it's dead. So make sure to actually replace your strings when it becomes pretty evident that the string is not, you know, snapping back. It's not as elastic. You can feel it on the string. If you can move the string a bit too easily and it doesn't really want to go back into place, it's about time to change the string. The pros do that all the time. They have on a different level, obviously. But I would still recommend that whether, you know, you're playing, let's say 16 hours with a string setup, or you're playing 8 hours. It depends a little bit on how hard you hit, so it's hard to give a general recommendation. So for example, when I talked about hybrid setups, this would be a hybrid setup where you have the polyester in the mains and you have the multi-filament in the crosses. The combination of those two strings gives quite a nice sensation, a good mix of control from the polyester string and a bit more power, and a kind of lower launch angle from the multi-filament string. So it's definitely, if you haven't tried a hybrid setup and you're open to playing with polyesters, even if half a set polyester, a hybrid setup is something I definitely recommend you should try it. It has a really nice sensation when you play with it. You can also try, obviously, to do hybrids with polyester strings. Here are two polyester strings from Hazel. One is shaped and one is round. And that's also a way you can experiment a bit. Casper Ruud does that on his Yonex DR100, his extended one. He actually has two polyester strings, and that's becoming a bit more popular, that you want to kind of find a blend of performance with two different strings. But polyester strings are all about snapback. I think it's time to change this one. For example, like it's a little bit too easy to move it. There are string tension meters, like Torna one, where you twist towards the string. And there is a ERT 300 where you put it in the string bed and you get like a value, a DT value that you can see, okay, it's time to restring. It even says that if it drops below 26 DT, it says that it's time to restring. And you can check with their meter then if it's how the tension holds up on an average. So those tools can be good. The ERT is a little bit more expensive, but it's definitely more exact than the Torna one. If you've been playing with multi-filament and you want to get into polyester strings, I definitely recommend going for a softer string. There are many of them that have a kind of soft in the name. There's strings like MSV Swift, quite a soft string. This is Swift in a shift, and there's Solinco Hyper-G soft, Vulcan Cyclone Tour, Wilson Revolve Spin, pretty soft string. They tend to drop tension a little bit faster, so they're not the most durable unless you hit very flat or you're not like a string mover at all. So keep that in mind. For better durability and tension maintenance, there are more like consistent strings. Laxalon 4G is one, Solinco Tour Bite. These are strings that I personally like. Headlynx Tour, that give you that extra control and bite and dependability in the racket. So there are all kinds of different strings you can try. The market is completely oversaturated in my opinion, because it's so tough now when you're testing so many strings, and many of them are made in the same factory, just have a different brand on them or a different color. And it becomes quite frustrating to be a tester, because sometimes it's the same string with kind of a different packaging brand, whatever. So you can definitely go for usually a lower cost string and get some decent performance. Depends on your liking. For most players, it's fine to use a softer polyester string, for example. I'm a big fan of hybrids, and that's maybe one of my favorite setups. Always like a hybrid, especially with natural gut, but natural gut is quite expensive. So you can use a high quality multifilament as well. And that hybrid setup is usually where I find the sweet spot in the playability. If you have a string that you find is very dependable, that you like, I kind of recommend you stay with that. Whether it's a hybrid setup, a multifilament string, or a polyester string, because once you get down into the string jungle, it is deep and vast. There's endless brands, it's easier to produce, and you can keep testing and testing and testing to find that perfect string, and there is no real perfect string. So I always recommend to find something you like and stick with that for your own tennis. If you want to play your best tennis, if you're into testing, well, be my guest. I think it's cheaper to test strings than to test rackets. Tennis is a very personal game. There are hundreds of rackets, hundreds of strings. And once you kind of narrow down your choices, I think it becomes easier. I tend to like dependable strings, Olu Power, Luxilon 4G, Solinka Hyper G, or Tor Bite. I like Headlynx Tor, Head Hawk, multifilaments. Many Technifiber strings are very good there, like the X1 Biphase, Technifiber Triax as well, which is kind of a hybrid string of a poly and a multifilament. Head Velocity MLT is good in one full setup. I don't like it as much in a hybrid. Torline Caviar is one of my favorite softer strings. Very good. I do like Grapple Snake Tor M8. So there's so many good strings out there. And now I tested Restring Zero, which is also a nice softer polyester string. Kind of endless, and it's very, very personal. So don't take my word for it. Try to experiment and find your string, but at least you have some general guidance here. The string is important. It's as important as the racket. So don't skimp out on your restringing. Just try to find something that actually feels great, and then you can stick to that. That is all for now. Have a nice day, and don't forget to play some tennis.